Usually when I hear about a Japanese-made game made exclusively for America, I get, well, more than a little hesitant. However, one of the greatest made-for-America games I ever saw out of Japan would have to be Gundam Battle Assault 2. You see, back in the 90s when Toonami was airing Gundam Wing, it was kind of a big deal amongst anime fans. People really liked it. They wanted a game based on it. Well, that's all fine and dandy, except Gundam Wing kind of came out quite a few years ago in Japan, and as such, the most recent Gundam Wing game was on Super Nintendo, which they didn't really make games on anymore. So they had to find a way to make a Gundam Wing game on PS1. So what they did was they took a game called Gundam the Battle Masters 2 and reskinned it, taking out one of the original mechs and replacing it with the Wing, replacing the main character with Hiro Yui. And the original game actually had a completely made-up cast. It took place in a post-apocalyptic world with a bunch of original characters who are like salvaging Gundams and fighting one another with them. And they just decided, well, let's replace them with the actual cast of Gundam that no one in America was really familiar with at the time. I actually find that kind of funny, personally. Anyway, the game was a relative success. It looked good, it played good, it had Hiro Yui and the Wing Gundam in it. People liked it, but people really wanted more Gundam Wing. Around this same time, though, they were looking at bringing another Gundam series to America. G Gundam, which, bigger problem, G Gundam's even older than Gundam Wing, and guess what? The only G Gundam video game was on Super Nintendo. So it was at this point they dusted off Gundam the Battle Masters again, but this time went all in. Instead of just sort of reskinning one mech, they went ahead and made a bunch of all-new original mechs from scratch from Gundam Wing and G Gundam. Basically, the entire Endless Waltz cast was there, along with the entire Shuffle Alliance from G Gundam, making it undeniably the best G Gundam game ever made. And there were just as many, if not more, Wing mechs that there were in the Super Nintendo Wing game. And since this was built on the Gundam Battle Assault Battle Master engine, why don't we just throw in everyone we already had as well? The result was a cast of more than 30 characters in what has to be one of the greatest Gundam games ever made. But they actually went the extra mile, replacing the original 2D backgrounds with all new 3D ones, which at first you'd say, well, that probably wasn't such a good idea considering it's a PS1 game, but it actually turned out pretty well. I actually further applaud this because, as I mentioned, Gundam Battle Assault 1 was based on Battle Masters 2. And Battle Masters 2 was a mere expansion pack of Battle Masters 1. Looking at them all together, Battle Masters 1, 2, and the original Battle Assault all look and seem to basically play identically, with the only difference being the interface and, in the case of Battle Assault, the characters. So the fact that they actually added in all these new characters and completely overhauled the background, that was more work that they had ever put into one of these Battle Master Battle Assault games ever. And the craziest thing, this thing was made exclusively for America. It was not intended to be released in Japan. They would eventually release it in Japan, but chopped in half as a budget game. That's right, they would actually take the Wing cast and make that one game, and the G Gundam cast and make that a separate game. If you had save data from one and used it on the other, it would unlock the cast in that game. But even if you had both halves of the game, you still wouldn't have the entire cast of Battle Assault 2. So not only was the game made for America, but even when it came out in Japan, it was better in America. That seriously blows my mind. It's a damn Gundam game. How does it play, though? How is it? Well, it's actually a pretty solid fighter. You've got weak punch, strong punch, weak kick, strong kick. Yeah, it's pretty much just a 2D fighter, but with Gundams here. You can press any two buttons simultaneously to dodge into the background. Quarter circles and half circles and dragon punch motions all do special moves. There's actually quite a few shared motions in the game. The game is very fond of having universal inputs. So for every character, quarter circle plus punch is their shoot gun move, which drains their ammo, as they do have an ammo meter for that, so you're not just saying they're spamming that. For every character, a half circle from back to forward and punch is their unblockable move. I think a half circle from forward to back and punch, I'm not entirely certain on this, but I think that was how you did it, is the funnel attack if your character has funnels. I can't remember if it was a separate input or if it was just mechs either had funnel attacks or had unblockables. Again, I don't entirely remember the specifics. And to do a special move, it's a quarter circle from down to forward and 2 punches simultaneously. This would actually be one of my only real complaints with the game, is the fact that any 2 buttons causes you to dodge into the background, and quarter circle and 2 punches is how you do your super move. So a lot of times I'll try to do a super move and I'll accidentally dodge into the background and get punished on recovery, and that can be a little annoying. Actually, the controls themselves are a little bit strange. As well, the mechs walk incredibly slowly, and there's a little bit of a delay in getting them to stop running, and their jumps are super short if you don't use boosters. Basically, they actually feel like large, heavy mechs punching one another. There's even a few moves that have a little bit more delay in their execution than you'd really be used to. So at first, it can be a little off-putting, trying to finagle these giant robots into punching one another in the face. But once you get used to it, it actually works out quite well, and the game sort of becomes Marvel vs. Capcom 2 with Gundams, especially with all the giant-ass beam projectiles and big multi-hit combos going everywhere. Actually, a few other systems I didn't mention. Number 1, there's a booster system. Hitting R1 causes your mech to boost, allowing you to fly around in the air. You can do a quarter circle in R1 to go into flight mode, but there's a limited amount of fuel you can use. You have to land to refill that. Also, the game doesn't use rounds, instead it uses multiple energy bars, a sort of Killer Instinct Darkstalkers 3 style. Basically, when a bar is depleted, it says overheating, and your mech falls to the ground, and then it eventually gets back up, and it can't be hit when it's overheated and stuff. So each of those bars is essentially a round, but they all flow together. It's just kind of neat. I think one of the strangest things to me personally is the super meters. You have 3 stocks of them, and they're completely full at the start, and they do not recharge. So right at the beginning, you can use all your supers, and it's sort of a question of how you want to conserve those supers. Really, it all works out pretty darn well, and again, it's kind of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 with Gundams. However, having said that, the game is completely broken. You can combo a super into a super into a super. There's definitely not a lot of focus on balance, but then again, who can really blame them? This isn't meant to be a serious competitive fighter. This is meant to be, hey, we made a fighting game with Gundams. Isn't that fucking awesome? And side note, it is, alright? I love it. The graphics, though, are probably one of the things I really like about the game. As you can probably tell, the mechs are made up of multiple rotating sprites, which on human characters usually looks really awkward and bad and rather stiff and robotic. But you take stiff robotic movements, you put it on a giant robot, and it looks rather natural. The visual style really works. A lot of people compared it to Capcom's Cyberbots, but this thing definitely took it a lot further. A part of me wants to say Battle Assault 1 looked better, but that's a bit subjective. I think the interface looked better on it, and I liked that the camera would zoom in on mechs as they punched one another, but mostly it's just sprite consistency. More than anything else, since the new mechs were added in later. If you look really closely, they do look just a little off, again, if you look really, really closely at them. Having said that, that's probably why it doesn't zoom in. Really, the biggest difference, they do actually match up rather well most of the time. The biggest difference between the old sprites and the new sprites is that the old sprites take battle damage with huge chunks of armor flying off as they punch one another, while the new ones, they'll take a little leg damage, but that's about it. That's probably the most disappointing thing about that. And really, you'd think the fact that it had 2D backgrounds in the previous game, while this one has 3D backgrounds, would be one of the reasons why the previous one looked better. But really, going back and playing it, those 2D backgrounds were a little bit on the bland side. when push comes to shove, the second game doesn't really look worse, considering it has basically all the mechs from the previous game, plus all these new mechs. Yeah, it's obviously the better purchase. It plays nearly identical, but it feels a little more combo-y. I do think the Wing and G Gundam mechs are just better suited for a fighting game than the Universal Century Gundams were. Really, it all comes together to make what I feel is one of the PS1's greatest original fighting games. And that's important. Yeah, there were a bunch of good fighting games on PS1, but most of them were arcade ports, and now that we can actually emulate them arcade perfectly, why would you ever go back to the crappy PS1 ports? They were good at the time, but now, why? This, however, there's no arcade release. It's completely original to PS1, and it stands the test of time. I still think it looks good to this day. It certainly plays good to this day. I think it's a little on the overlooked side. It definitely has a cult following, but really, this is something worth revisiting. It's a darn shame I don't see it in the PSN store right now, because this thing is a winner and easily the best Gundam game to a Western audience. You see, here's sort of a funny thing. G Gundam and Gundam Wing are spin-off alternate universe series from the main Gundam series. In Japan, Gundam is sort of their equivalent of Star Trek. It's big, long-running sci-fi franchise, spans multiple years. People are fiercely devoted to it, and most Gundam games are about Universal Century. They feature Universal Century mechs or Seed mechs, and that's the main focus. That's what they really look at. You might find the G Gundam and the Wing in some of these games as secret bonus unlockables and stuff, but you seldom see a sizable cast of G Gundam characters and Wing characters. You're not really going to get Dragon Gundam and Ultron Gundam in the same game very frequently, and Maxter? Rose? Yeah, those are even less likely than any of these other Gundams. Again, in fact, G Gundam, supposedly Japan didn't even like it. It was the first alternate universe Gundam. It was so different from regular Gundam. It was aimed at a younger audience. It was clearly made to sell toys. The Gundams were goofy as fuck in it. A lot of Japan supposedly hated G Gundam when it first came out. So, yeah, this is the best G Gundam game, period. One of, if not the best, Wing Gundam game. No, Gundam Wing game, whatever, period, and a damn good Gundam fighting game. This thing is a winner. I can't praise it enough. Thankfully, it is not super rare. You can usually find copies floating around $20, and I recommend it to anyone who likes to see Gundams punch one another, whether you're a fan of the series or not. My only real complaints with it are, when you're playing the story mode, and you're choosing a G Gundam character, you're going to be going to the G Gundam stage a lot. And the music is stage specific. So you're going to keep hearing the same damn song in every match. Also, I think there could have been more. You see, not all the Gundams from the previous games returned, but they're on disc. People who have hacked the disc have found you could use a Game Shark code to put the Cubile back in there, the original Wing from the previous game back in there, even the Hamma Hamma, which was the mech that they replaced with the original Wing. All these mechs can be put back in the game with the Game Shark code. They're still in there. It's still built on the same thing. So why aren't they selectable? I mean, for fuck's sake, there's an entire row devoted to broke-ass boss characters so people can play as the Big Zam. I'm not opposed to that because boss characters are fun and all, but then, like, any argument of, oh, they were imbalanced goes completely out the window. Why didn't you put these characters in here? I think that's a huge oversight. There could have been more stages. The water in the boat stage looks a little bit goofy. But generally speaking, there's not a lot to complain about other than the fact that it feels a little awkward at first and the game is definitely imbalanced. But man, this game, this is America's Gundam. As you can tell, because it has Gundam Maxter in it. Anyway, this is Jell, and I hope you enjoyed looking at my game archives. See ya!